welcome back to Prompt Circle, where we discuss AI use cases. In today's video, we'll be creating a Slack bot that can make API calls autonomously based on prompts. Our bot will take prompts in and make song suggestions and create playlists. Let's take a look. Alright, so let's take a quick look at exactly how this is going to work. Here, I'm going to just provide a prompt to say, give me a playable link of the most popular playlist in the UK. And then I'm going to also ask it to explain why this playlist is also popular. So that's essentially the request that I'm making. And now it's starting to work on my request. And once it's done, as you can see, it goes and fetches a playlist, Jazz UK playlist. The playlist is popular because it features best music from Britain's vibrant jazz scene. And as we actually go along, you could see some other requests that I have from before. In the meantime, you can see some of the songs that are actually in that particular playlist as well. And as we start to scroll up, you can see my previous requests, for instance, getting me the most popular playlist in the US, getting me the most popular playlist in Canada. I also ask questions like, what's Eminem's most popular song, and so on and so forth. So you can really give any type of request around Spotify, and it's going to be able to go in and provide you a response. Alright, so here are a list of to-dos. First, we want to set up a Spotify developer account. Next, we want to set up our Slack app. Then we're going to create the actual app that's going to be handling our different events in Slack using the Slack Bolt framework. Then we're going to be creating a handle message function as well as a Spotify agent function using the Langchain agent module. Then finally, we're going to go ahead and test our work. To get dev access to Spotify, you need to sign up for a Spotify account. So you go to accounts.spotify.com and then you can go ahead and sign up. Typically just love to sign up with my Google account, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Alright, so once you're signed in, you get access directly into the Spotify for developers area, and all you really need to do is to go into your dashboard, accept the terms of service, and now you can go ahead and create an app. So we'll create an app by clicking create app. We're going to call our app a Slack Spotify DJ, an app that recommends and suggests music based on simple prompts. Okay, I'm just going to use the Prompt Circle website here, so https://promptcircle.com, and then we're going to put a redirect URI here. I think to make it easy, you could just use the local host here. So we can use local hosts, and you could use any of the ports there. So I'm going to choose to use 8080, and we can just put a callback here. Okay. All right, so I understand and agree to this terms of service, and then you go ahead and hit save. And now we have our Spotify application created. Next up, you want to go in and grab your client ID as well as your client secret. So you want to store that in a safe place because we're going to be using that along with your redirect URIs. So those are the only things that you need. All right, now it's time to create your Slack app. So as usual, we just go ahead to our api.slack.com/apps. We'll create a new Slack app, and we're going to do it from scratch here. And we're going to call our app a Spotify DJ app. And we're going to choose a workspace, our Prompt Circle Learn workspace, and then we're going to go ahead and create the app. So then next up, we want to go right into OAuth permissions and grant the right scopes. So here we're going to add the IM history scope. We're going to add the chat right scope, and we're going to also add the chat right public scope as well. Once we're done with that, we go ahead and install the app to our workspace to generate our bot token. Remember to copy that bot token and keep it somewhere safe because we're going to be using it. Next up, we want to go ahead and activate socket mode. So we go to socket mode, we enable socket mode, which will prompt us to add an app token. So go ahead and add an app token and generate that app token. Copy this token. We're going to be using it also for the app. So now we have socket mode on. We can go ahead and go to our events and ensure that we can receive the specific events that we need. So what are those events? Well, we need to be able to read messages, so message IM, and we also want the app mention message as well, event as well. We'll go ahead and save that, then reinstall the app into Slack one more time, and now we should be good to go. All right, so let's get our app all set up. So in the terminal, go ahead and make a new directory called Slack Spotify DJ bot, and then cd into that directory. So next up, go ahead and create a virtual environment, and then these are the variables we're going to be using. We're going to need the Slack bot token, which you obtained earlier on, along with the Slack app token. We need your OpenAI API key, which you can obtain from the OpenAI developer website. And then we need your Spotify client ID, client secret, and the redirect ID, the redirect URI, which we did configure earlier on. All right, so one last thing, we need to download a few YAML files from a repository that contains Open API specs, which is how we're going to be feeding the large language model, OpenAI GPT, with information on how to call the various APIs it's going to be calling. I have also added a repository where you can find hundreds of API spec documentation, which is written in the Open API specification format. So you can use that to try out other capabilities when it comes to using your large language models to communicate with API endpoints. All right, so we're going to be using the following libraries for our application. We're going to use Langchain, which provides a wrapper for us to communicate with these different API specification documents. We're going to be using OpenAI, of course, as well as Spotify. Spotify is a library that is designed to allow us to work with the Spotify API. All right, so let's dive straight into the code. Now, first and foremost, let's talk about some of the modules that we need here. The first one is the OS model, which allows us to access our environment variables. We have the YAML because we're going to be working with YAML file formats. So remember, the Open API specification are typically written in YAML, so we need a way to actually understand them. And then we're using the Langchain agent toolkit, open API spec, to return this module called reduce open API spec, which is going to allow us to take the entire API specification and make sense of it. So it's what actually goes in, passes through the entire documentation to detect which API endpoints your application is going to be calling based on a particular prompt. So it reads through all the endpoints, understands how they behave, and then it allows it to determine which one is right when a request comes in. Now we're using the Spotify util. This util basically is for authentication, allows you to retrieve your bearer token based on your client ID, client secret, and redirect URI, which we had obtained earlier on. When you do it for the first time, it's going to prompt you to go through an authentication / authorization flow, a typical OAuth flow, which you should actually go through to get access to the tokens. Then it now uses the token to do a refresh token flow every time. So that particular util is going to allow us to actually execute on that particular authorization. You can also obtain the OAuth to access token directly and use it if you want. I will also share some links in the chat as to how to obtain those. Next up is our Langchain requests wrapper. The request wrapper really allows you to use the Python request library much more easily, so making API calls, things like that. So when our agent understands which open API endpoint it needs to call, it uses the request wrapper to actually execute that call. Next up, we're going to be using the chat OpenAI module from the chat models from Langchain. So this gives us access to ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo models, as well as GPT-4. We're going to be using GPT-4 for our demonstration today. Next up is the planner. Now the planner is basically a specific type of agent that acts in a specific way. It plans out, it takes the request that you send in and plans out this a set of tasks or action it's going to perform. It's typically hierarchical, so it's going to say these are the things I'm going to perform, and then it's going to go ahead and perform them. So Langchain already have these toolkits, and this one is specific for API requests. So it's under the Open API toolkit, which basically says, okay, if I've gotten this request, here are the things I need to go do to execute on them. We'll see that shortly when we actually start hitting some requests. Okay, next up is our Slack related modules. So the app class, which basically contains everything we need to set up a Slack application in Python using the Slack build framework, basically allows us to initialize our app and also listen for events as well. We're using socket mode because we want to be able to use our app freely, whether we're behind a firewall or VPN or anything like that. So we're using the socket mode handler, which basically just allows you to open up a WebSocket connection with your application. All right, so now let's talk about some of the things that we need to do. Now, first off, we need to load our Spotify Open API specification, which is in YAML. Now, we had downloaded this earlier on when I specified some of the things that we needed to do. So whether you're using Windows or Mac, you could just simply crawl and download this directly. When you download it from that repository, it should look something like this. So it should have a specification that meets the Open API specification, and you can see basically has all the information about our Spotify API endpoints, showing basically how all the various endpoints are available. So whenever we send a request, it goes into this document, sees which one is the relevant one, takes all the information it needs to send those requests accordingly. And so that's how it actually uses API documentation autonomously to execute commands. Remember, you can also use your own API documentation. In the past, I've actually used ChatGPT to convert a simple open API, a simple API documentation into an open API specification. So if you're looking for a fast way to do it, that's one way you can do it. So next up, we're gonna go ahead and initialize our Spotify authentication. So like I said earlier on, our Spotify authentication allows us to get access to a bearer token or access token, which we're going to use. So this basically kind of initializes the entire OAuth scope. I'll put a link in the description as to how you can go about doing this as well. If you want to obtain the access token yourself just for your test, you can do that as well. All right, next up is the headers. This is how we're basically constructing where this is how we are constructing our Spotify authentication headers. So we're using we're passing in the Spotify API specification in here, so it's going to pull in the right headers, and then we're also creating a request wrapper which is going to be pulling in the headers. So headers would be, authentication, authorization, things of that nature. It's going to pull that into our request wrapper so that whenever we're making a request, it's taking the authentication and any other attributes in that needs to be in a typical request header. It's passing that through into the request. All right, now we initialize our large language model. Like we said, we're using Chat OpenAI, and we're using the GPT-4 model, and our temperature is set to 0. As always, whenever you're doing anything where you're looking for factual representation of information, you're always setting your temperature to 0. Next up, we're now going to go ahead and actually initialize our agent. And to initialize our agent, we're using the planner function here, right? The planner module, I should say here, which contains this function called create open API agent, which takes in the API specification which we had initialized earlier on. It takes in the request wrapper, which is going to be using to do the requests, and then passes in also the large language model, which is what's going to be which is basically what's going to be doing the reasoning, the logic, and also presenting us with the responses back. Okay, so next up, once we're done with that, we want to initialize our Slack application as always, just by simply passing the token, the Slack bot token, into our app class. And then we're ready to listen for events. We're listening for a message event here. And from that message event, we're obtaining, first and foremost, we're acknowledging that we received the event. So that needs to happen in Slack. You need to acknowledge, within 3 seconds of receiving a request. So this ACK function really allows us to perform that. Now we're obtaining the text that comes in through the message and storing it in our user query variable here. So to obtain that, we're basically using the body attribute, and which contains the payload for the entire event. We're picking up what type of event it is and then the text that is involved. And the very first thing we're doing here is to just indicate that we are currently working on the command and we need just a few seconds to be able to perform that. Now, once we're done with that, we can now go ahead and run our agent. To run the agent, you have to use the .run function, and you're going to pass in the user query, of course, and it uses that query to go ahead and return a response, which we're storing in the agent response variable here, which we're gonna go ahead and send once a response is generated. As always, we're gonna also initialize our socket mode handler and get our app started, of course. So now let's go ahead and start our app and see exactly how it's going to work. So go ahead and go Python 3 bot.py, and that should start our application. So we see Bolt app is running. So now let's go into Slack and make a request. So we're gonna go ahead and say, provide me with a good song from Rema. Give me a playable link. So now when I send that message, first we see our initial confirmation telling us that it's currently working on this. This is good just because this particular command is going to take a little bit of time, so it's always good to always give that. Now let's go into our agent executor chain just to see what's going on. So here's how our planner is going to execute this. First, it's going to understand the context of the message that was received. So here it's saying, okay, I need to find the right API calls to get a good song from Rema and provide a playable link. Now it's saying these are the 5 things I need to do to actually accomplish that. First, I need to use the search endpoint with a search query parameter for artist Rema. I'm going to return the search results and get the artist ID. And I'm going to get the artist ID and /top tracks to get the top tracks by country. And I'm going to select a top track and retrieve its Spotify ID. Now, using that ID, I'm going to also provide a playable link which concatenates the ID with a typical Spotify URL. So now it knows that this is what it's going to be doing, and then it's going to go ahead and start performing that action. So what it's doing behind the scenes is reading the YAML document, seeing which endpoints are required. So it's identified that this is the right endpoint, for instance, to do a search, understands which parameters need to be passed in to make that search. So in this case, we're doing a search on artists, and then it also knows that it needs to extract the ID of this particular artist. Next up, it's now going to go look for the top tracks, right? So this is another endpoint it's calling top tracks for this particular ID. It's passing a country, and then it's pulling back the ID of the top tracks. Now, once it's done getting all that information, it knows exactly, okay, so the track ID, the name, okay, this is Calm Down with Selena Gomez, the track number, which album it's coming from, when it was released, and now it knows that, okay, here's all the information I need. And then it says, now it can now send back that information to say, I found a good song from Rema and retrieve the playable link. I can now provide the information to the user. So a good song from Rema is Calm Down with Selena Gomez from the album Rave and Roses Ultra. You can listen to it on Spotify using this link. So let's go back to our Slack app, and we can see right here, this is really awesome. It's been able to go pull in that information, and it's been able to also provide us with a playable link, which allows us to play it right from inside Slack as well. Really, really remarkable. Slack obviously provides an unfurl of links, which allows us to at least preview this. But even if we didn't want to, we can go straight into the Slack, into the Spotify, and it also takes us directly into the song as well. So that's exactly what this application does. This was more to just show you how you can combine large language models with open API specification documents, giving them the power to make API calls on your behalf autonomously based on simple prompts. I hope you learned a lot from this. I'm looking forward to seeing what you build using this knowledge, and thank you. Until next time, have a great one. Cheers.